Okay. Thank you.
So, well, hello and welcome everyone to Kitaabi Baatein. I'm Abhishek, also known as wale Bhaiya. My guest today is noted author Rajesh Talwar, and he is an author who has authored about 38 books, if I'm not wrong.
That's
And
true.
his travelogue is his latest book, where elephants danced and dragons flew. And for the first time, he's when he has traveled, he has talked about his travels, about the countries he has traveled in. And by the way, those who don't know, he has written on a variety of topics. So, sir, when I first got to know about you, that I will be interviewing you, I had this a bit of dilemma in mind. What all should I talk about, because you've written on very wide topics. The latest, which is a travelogue, you wrote plays, you wrote children's fiction, you wrote on law, uh, too many things. So, my first question before we talk about your first book is, what made you and how you managed to write on such wide topics?
Thanks very much, Abhishek, for having me on this program. And good to talk to Books Wale Bhaiya. It's a good title also. It's a good tagline. I think, yes, to answer your question, uh, although I had written 37 books before this
Yes,
one, this is the 38th, I had never written a travelogue till now.
right.
So I always like to stretch myself uh, and try something new. In fact, the book before this was a collection of short stories,
Yes,
which also was my first collection of short stories. So, although I had written 36 books before that, there was no collection of short stories, and this is my very first travelogue. So, in the future also, I like to challenge myself. So, I would like to attempt a book, say, on spirituality, uh,
wonderful.
or maybe try something on this uh, a motivational book. Uh,
Right.
so with every new book, I like to sort of stretch myself, enjoy the challenge, uh, and not just stay. Of course, some people, they just stick to one genre.
One genre,
If you're
right?
successful in crime fiction, you just stick to crime fiction. Or if you're a romance novelist, you stick to romance. Uh,
Right.
but that is not somehow so appealing to me.
Right.
Uh, I like to try out different things.
I also noticed one thing you wrote on some, like you wrote short stories, you wrote plays, something which bases my interaction with publishers and authors. So everyone is into basically writing novels, full length novels, and within novels, many are writing more into, these days you can say, mythological fiction, which is
Uh,
becoming like a very famous genre. So I think that also I found interesting, that you are writing not say to for the publisher, but it seems you're definitely writing for yourself, something which very few authors can dare to do, because everyone eventually looks at the commercial incentive, what they can achieve, because I in various interactions, many authors are not very much into favor of writing short stories. Even publishers, basis my interactions with some of the publishers, not many, they say, because somewhere they feel, okay, this is not a very popular genre, not something which may make it to the bestseller list. And after all, of course, unfortunately, that commercial perspective is very much there. So I think that's indeed great to see, someone definitely writing from his heart. So, sir, first we talk about this book. So, various countries you traveled and you chose Asia. So, my first question: you chose Asia and you did not choose Europe, or any Western country. Any particular reason for that? Because, to be frank, the young generation is very much fascinated by Europe, and if you open Instagram, every second person looks like is vacationing in Europe. So my first question: how you came to choose Asia and not say Europe or other Western country?
Well, thanks, Abhishek. Firstly, I'd also like to thank you for that very important observation about writing for yourself rather than being driven by market forces. So I think, uh, for a true artist, he should be triggered from within. I
Yes.
absolutely agree with what you're saying. because otherwise the publisher will say, okay, for example, Mills and Bones. Some
Yeah.
years ago, their sales were dipping. Then they said, okay, we have a formula. Let's add some steamy sex scenes to our
Yes.
formula.
True.
So, uh, so that kind of writing is very different. There you are, I would say, more of a craftsman, and if you're writing from within, you're more of an artist.
Yes.
But I'm very pleased that you picked up this point that writers should also, of course, you can't ignore the market. Market is
Right.
also very important, but you should
Right.
not be driven solely by the market.
Correct.
So that's a wonderful observation. Uh,
Yeah.
as regards Asia, I feel that Asia is the future. Many people are saying this is the century of Asia. Uh, I feel my parents some years ago they said, uh, "Take us on a holiday, and we don't want to go on a tour where everything is guided." I said,
Right.
"Let's go to Asia then. Let's not go to Europe
Right.
because Asia is more interesting, and Asia is also more hospitable." Uh,
Yes.
so, if you go to Europe, they will give you the keys, and you're on the 23rd floor, sir. Please take your bags up yourself.
Correct.
Whereas if you go to Asia, if you go to Bali, if you go to Thailand, if you go to Vietnam, the Asian culture is different, and they will say, "We will, take you up to your room." They will be very courteous, very polite, and my parents also had a good time, and I think. Uh, for me, although I have spent a lot of time in Europe, I see something like an Asian identity, an Asian consciousness. Uh, with the exception perhaps of bad boy China, I think the rest of Asia should come together. Uh, and there is a lot of commonality we share. So I
Yes.
wanted to uh, write about Asia for this reason, amongst others. And also, I should say that I hope more and more people start writing. Indians are traveling now all over the world. Earlier,
Yes.
the Westerners would travel and they would spend 2 weeks somewhere and write a book
Correct.
about it. Uh,
Correct.
but the Indian perspective is actually, or a non Western perspective is actually equally or more interesting.
Yes.
Uh, so, if I have to pick up a book by a Japanese writer on New York, I may find it more interesting than a book by an English writer on New York because the English writer's perspective I already know.
Right.
So
So I think you raised two very valid points. So I'll talk about the second one first. As you said, Indians are now traveling abroad, and we typically see a book from someone in America or England writing about India. But you will very rarely see an Indian who either lived in US or traveled in US or any Western country and writing about there. So that's very less as of now. Do you think that even after so many decades after independence, this point is being raised uh, in the last couple of years more, that many of the Western writers and scholars, because they are kind of dominating the world view. So in a sense, they write what they feel about those countries without understanding the cultural or social context, and in a way they are dominate not only dominating the world of culture, but also in a way it's a kind of cultural subjugation also, because what even an Indian knows about India, he knows it from the Westerners. And many times things often get manipulated because that can be used as a tool even in present times for cultural subjugation. How do you see that?
I think that is also very valid and interesting point because uh, this domination, I should say, is slowly coming to an end.
Yes.
Because, for example, when I was in Cambodia, I found that, or even in Vietnam, I found the number of Asian tourists is now more than the number of Western tourists.
Yes.
Whereas earlier it was the Western tourists who were dominating, now there are more and more Asians, including Indians, who are getting out who want to see the world.
Yes.
And Westerners may not see many things. For example, the
Yes.
Angkor Wat, great ruins of Angkor Wat, the temples, the fabulous temples. A Westerner will look at it differently. An Indian
Correct.
will look at it differently. So uh, I think this shift is now gradually taking place. It's taking place in all dimensions. You find there's news media which is coming out, which
Yes.
is giving an Indian perspective. And to
Correct.
the surprise of the Western media, more and more non-Western people are turning to Indian media and saying, okay, let's have this view as well. Let's not just have,
Exactly.
and as I mentioned, I would be interested in uh, a Japanese perspective on Europe, a Thai perspective on Europe, uh,
Correct.
Indonesian perspective on Europe. Let's not just have European or Western perspectives on the rest of the world. That becomes very boring. Even
That's
a
true.
title like this present one, uh,
Yeah.
where elephants danced
Thanks,
and
Dance
dragons
and
flew,
Dragons Sleep.
I don't think a Westerner would have come up with this title because,
Absolutely.
yeah, the elephant as a symbol of Indian influence and the dragon as a symbol of Chinese influence, those are not the prisms through which he would see these nations.
Exactly, and they would definitely be seeing only through the Western lens and interpreting. So, in fact, this reminds me in the season of Diwali, whenever my friends come and say that about burning crackers and all that, and I replied to them that okay, this has definite merit that whether we should burn crackers or not, but I strongly believe I don't need a New York Times journalist telling me this. The
Right.
point has definite merit. I'm not denying it whether we should ban crackers altogether, but why you need a New York Times a validation from someone sitting in New York that hey, this is very wrong, part of their culture and all. So perhaps we should apply our logic and then decide, what's right or what's wrong. So yeah, I think definitely this is
Absolutely.
important as you mentioned. Indians or any Asian countries writing about themselves first of all, interpreting and looking at it from their own perspective rather than the Western lens. So the second question which you talked about, the cultural similarities as well as differences. So many Asian countries, to an extent, we can say that yes, culturally, many of them are similar. Buddhism is very prevalent in Thailand. Uh, and we have this Ram Leela being organized in Indonesia, if I am not wrong, in Bali itself. So, what if you would like to specify the few points? What are the major similarities you observed in these Asian countries? Before I come to specific pointers about countries, what major
Okay, well,
similarities you see in Indian culture and these countries?
one of course, as you mentioned, the influence, the Indian influence. Uh, so some people said when you're talking about elephants danced and dragons flew, surely the Chinese influence is more because you're talking about Vietnam, you're talking about
Yes,
Singapore, Hong Kong. They are basically ethnic Chinese majority nations. I said that is
right.
not necessarily the case because don't forget that the dragon has been heavily influenced by the elephant.
Yes,
Buddhism has influenced China
yes,
enormously. So,
true.
uh, and you see the Indian influence everywhere. Uh, Now, Thailand has a very beautiful airport and it has a very beautiful, even more beautiful name.
Yes,
I actually don't think in India we have such a beautiful name, Swaran Bhumi.
one more movie.
That is the
Yes,
name of their airport.
correct.
And if when I go to Thailand, the hotel I stay in, when I walk to Central World, I see there's a statue of Hanuman. I see there is a statue of Trimurti. So although Thailand is a Buddhist country, they are still strong Hindu slash Indian influence. And in Vietnam, which I mentioned, I went to a dance performance. Out of the 9 dance performances, 2 were based on Indian traditions. Uh, if you go to in Cambodia, you find some Indian television channels running, some Chinese television channels running. But if you are in Angkor Wat, you are invited to performance by Apsaras, and you
Right.
find lots of Apsara statues also at Angkor Wat, and you are reminded at once of India. So I could see even while walking through the ruins of Angkor Wat, other Indians and their feeling, because actually we in India don't realize the extent of our own influence.
Yes, true.
Uh, how we were the numero uno in the world for centuries,
Yes,
both in economic terms as well as cultural terms.
cultural
You
terms.
have the Chinese ambassador who himself 20, 30 years ago He said, well, India dominated us without firing a single bullet for
Yes.
centuries. So,
Yes.
so our cultural influence is just enormous.
Definitely, and I think sadly, what's happening today, many people, especially youngsters, they, under the influence of maybe the very left-leaning, very far left-leaning literature, they believe that India as a country never existed, and it's the Britishers who actually made India, and that is still the point of view held by many people, especially youngsters. I said, unfortunately, more than the left-leaning one. But fortunately, as you said, and you yourself have as an Indian author wrote on various countries. I think hopefully that situation should be turned into a positive direction, and Indians start looking at India just as it is. No
Well, I think,
overhype or no negative view, but just as it is.
yes, I would say, that I find myself actually more in the center because, on the one hand, I don't like the over left, over
Yes.
secular Indian culture hating people.
Yes.
At the same time, I also absolutely do not like the people who say that we have in our ancient texts the solution to all the world's problems.
Exactly.
Ayurveda,
Exactly.
for example, Ayurveda. Let's take
Yeah.
Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a great medical system. I myself use Ayurveda for many problems, medical problems. For cough, cold, I have not used allopathy for 15, 20 years. I just find Ayurveda is perfect.
Right.
However, to say that Ayurveda will cure corona, Ayurveda will
Correct.
cure cancer, what
Yes.
Indians who do that, they are on the other extreme of the left wing,
True.
over
True.
secular people,
Exactly.
because they are doing a disservice to Ayurveda. Of course, you cannot have a solution to all problems, and you
All
should not
problems.
pretend
Exactly.
that there. Uh, so, uh, so this puts us in a bad light, and it gives an excuse to people that look at,
Yes.
in a way, to rubbish Ayurveda. I have some very learned Ayurvedic practitioners whom I consult, and they talk about how Western pharma is not so happy with the rise of Ayurveda.
Yes.
If you see, we have been rising. I'll give you three examples. We have International Yoga Day,
Yes.
celebrated now also outside the UN. So, India's gifts to the world, you could say yoga is there, Ayurveda is there, and also we have meditation, which
Yes.
is set up all over the world. So, these are three great gifts which India has given, and we
Absolutely.
don't have to beat drums uh, and say that about our prowess. Some things we have to start again because we have the
Yes.
talent, we have the
Yes.
potential. We were number one once, and we can be number one again. But the first thing is to be humble about it, to be modest,
Exactly.
not to think that we have all the answers.
True. True. That's very true. Because as I said, that whatever we have to see what it is, neither anything less than that or not anything more than that. It has
Sure.
to be seen at what it is. Absolutely. So one more question about your books. So out of the countries you mentioned, which country you enjoyed the most and say you would like to visit it again and again?
Well, I think I enjoyed Bali tremendously. Uh, uh, but I can't say the same for Indonesia
Okay.
because Jakarta was very, you know, three times traffic problem compared
Okay.
to Mumbai or Delhi.
Okay.
Not a place I would like to visit because just getting from one place to another is like too bad. But
Right.
Bali was lovely, and Bali also gave me a glimpse into ancient India. The Balinese people are very friendly. They
Mm-hmm.
have so I would probably say India, say Bali, but I actually enjoyed all my visits.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Cambodia was very interesting.
Okay.
Vietnam was very interesting. It's difficult to choose, but
Right.
maybe Bali.
And what's your perspective on Japan? Because usually I see Indians are very fascinated by Japan and Japanese people, and sometimes I find it surprising that no, not many Indians would have visited Japan, but we carry a very positive perception of Japan and the Japanese people, whether it's the culture, whether it's people, whether it's the industry which it is known for, electronic items. That's how we came to know about Japan in our childhood. That Japanese electronic goods and all. How do you see Japan as a culture or as a country?
That's a very good question, Abhishek. And I think I will divert a little to the world of cinema to
Hmm.
illustrate the commonality between Japan and India. Because sometimes people say, well, the Japanese are very westernized, they're very modern, they have such mastery over technology.
Yeah.
Is there really any commonality? And I would say, do you know that a Japanese couple flew in just 2 months ago uh, to watch one of the new releases of Rajnikant, superstar Rajnikant?
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Yes. So Rajnikant's new movie, Jailer.
Yes.
Uh, so this Rajnikant fan club people, they flew down to see Jailer. And Indian movies, his other movies have also broken box office records.
Right.
Three Idiots has been very successful. So it's not only Rajnikant. Bahubali was very successful. So I have been telling filmmakers in India that they should cooperate with Japan because Japan is the only cinema uh, making country in the world that can give a challenge to Hollywood as far as the world of animation films is concerned,
Yes.
or
Yes.
anime.
Absolutely.
So recently, one of the great Japanese anime directors came to Mumbai, and Suzum, one of his latest productions, which broke box office records in China and across Asia. Uh, so you see, for example, India, Three Idiots broke off box office records
Yes.
in China as well. At
Yes.
that time, all the Hollywood productions, they didn't do well. Hollywood was very upset. They said, how come India is doing better? The
Yes.
same thing happened with Japan with their latest movie, Suzum, which is the number one performer of foreign films in China. So I said, we cannot catch up with the Japanese as far as animation is concerned because the
Right.
manga comic tradition is
Yes.
centuries old. They
Yes.
started manga comics 2 centuries ago, and the first printed manga comic came a century ago, and all these people have graduated to the world of animation filmmaking. Let's collaborate. We have, let's play to our own strengths, and then because globally it's only India who is giving Hollywood a run for its money. When I
Correct.
travel to Africa, uh, I find in Kenya, in Liberia, people ask me about Shah Rukh Khan. If I go to Egypt and Somalia, they ask me about Amitabh Bachchan. When I was
Yes.
in China and Taiwan, they were asking me about Amir Khan. So we have star recognition.
Yes.
We have, but if we collaborate with Japan, we can create wonderful animation cinema which will be a challenge to Hollywood. But this is just one of
Right.
the numerous areas we can cooperate in, uh, and I think we should.
Definitely, something which is very much missing from the Indian cinema and very much needed, I would say, because
Yes,
animation is
yes,
something, yeah, we target at kids, but I think that is enjoyed by everyone. When I myself seen many animation movies, so I think all in all is something which is not only, as I say, required, but is also can be useful for the. I remember like the animated Ramayan. I think it was made in Japan, if I, and
correct,
it
correct,
was made beautifully. So
correct, correct.
I ensured my kids, my nephew, my son, they all watch it. So that was one great example of anime collaboration, and animation, as you mentioned, is one uh, area where which can definitely we can collaborate more.
I
So
think
yeah,
you mentioned
yes,
Ramayana. That
yes,
was a great joint production.
oh,
But after
absolutely,
that, we haven't. Now, see if you see Hollywood, the Americans they are collaborating with the British, with the Australians, with Canadian cinema. We also need to collaborate because, but of course, Pakistan has ruined any possibility of collaboration. But
yes.
we have to look within Asia, and Japan really stands out as somebody we should collaborate with.
Absolutely. So now coming to your other books, just wanted to ask firstly about how you got motivated to write plays. Just like short stories, although I am a fan of short stories and plays, the script, because I personally believe as a reader, I believe writing short stories is even difficult in writing a novel because you need to have so many ideas for one book. Novel still it's one base story which you can expand, but if I'm writing similar length, say 250 or 300 short stories, I may be needing some 15, 20 different ideas. Of course, it's so that's my personal view, but and same is the case with plays. It's a completely different ball game. What made you write plays, and you wrote something which is very useful, helpful for the children? You wrote on Bhimrao Ambedkar, about constitution and other aspects related to India. So what motivated you to write plays, that too with children things in mind?
Well, I think you made two very interesting observations, Abhishek. Uh, the first one with regard to the short stories. And I agree, in fact, that a short story can be more challenging than
Yes.
a novel sometimes. And also, it reminds me of what Mark Twain once wrote. He said, I'm writing a short letter to you because I don't have the time to write a long letter. So
Yes.
the short story challenges you. You have to compress your ideas.
Yes.
You have to be very economical, and it's a beautiful medium. Uh, as regards the second question uh, regarding uh, the plays, I'm reminded of an American author who spent many years in Broadway, and his plays were not successful. And then he
Okay.
turned to novel writing. Uh, but he predicted, he became a very successful novelist. He wrote A Turn of the Screw, and he wrote many other successful novels. But he predicted that in the future, there would be a new novelistic form which would uh, be stripped of the descriptions. Uh,
Right.
because he said those descriptions are add ons, and when people have a smaller attention span, they will
Yes.
start reading novels. Instead of novels, they will start reading plays or plays with
Yes.
minimal description.
Yes.
Uh, so I think plays, of course, can be performed. They are more immediate, but I agree with that sort of prediction. I think in the future, more and more people will be reading plays as well. Uh,
Yes.
so, and But another reason why I wanted to write plays is because I feel that there is a really big shortage of good plays, both for
Yes.
adults and
Definitely.
for children.
Definitely.
Uh, my publisher was really astonished when my first play came out on Ambedkar. He said, Rajesh, this is a gap in the market uh, because he did not print so many copies. He thought, let me print a few thousand. Who's going to read the play? There may not be
Right.
so much demand. But then there was a huge demand. And he said, we have tapped into a vacuum in the market.
Right.
There is clearly a demand. Because if you see in many schools in the country, and here again, we come back to your original question of being too colonized. Uh, so you will find there will be performing Shakespeare. Shakespeare, of course, is a great playwright, and you should perform Shakespeare. Or very famous plays from the West.
Yes.
But and if they are performing Indian plays, they will be based on some Sanskrit play written in the past or some, ancient plays. So we
Yes.
don't have good contemporary material coming out for children.
Yes.
Uh, the material which is coming out is often it's a clone of the West. Uh,
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, no, that's a very valid point, and yeah, I do hope and expect that things like plays and short stories do catch up. And you are very absolutely right about the concept of short attention span, which may actually drive the sales and this genre of short stories. So that's very valid, and I think that's something which is likely to happen in the future, because many times I see some novels are way too lengthy, the people writing 800, 900 pages, and although there is still demand for them, but I'm not sure. I do also believe that, yeah, over time perhaps short stories and plays would definitely catch up. And I remember this noted economist and author Sanjeev Sanyalji has wrote on history as well. And he mentioned in one of his talks that he started as a short story writer, but it did not find favor with the publishers. And so he moved into writing history. And when his book did well, even for this short stories, he entered into an agreement to write another history book. That okay, you write another one, and then we will pick up your short stories book. And he mentioned in the preface that in the earlier times, all classical writers they wrote both novels and short stories. Pick up any classical writer, and whether from India or abroad, we have Premchand, we have Rabindranath Tagore, Sharat Chandra, and go to Western countries, Mark Twain, anyone they wrote everything. So something which is unfortunately missing, but yeah, missing these days. But yeah, let's hope that this times come back. So other than you also wrote books related to law, a lot of non-fiction, and you gave your insights about the Arushi case as well. And so wanted to ask about whether it's Arushi case or whether, for example, we have recently seen the Nithari case. Coincidentally, both are related to Noida. That's a coincidence. But do you see cases like these? How do you see that as travesty of justice, weak inefficient police system, inefficient judicial system? What's your take on cases like these, which we can say end up kind of nowhere or ending up in a way people or the general public doesn't see it, correct justice being meted out? How do you see that?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Mr. Sanyal because I was watching an interview of him recently, which he said something which I have believed for long. He said that we are doing a lot with the infrastructure, but the next challenge before us is to get our justice system working
Oh, absolutely.
efficiently.
Yes. Yes. He talks about that. Correct.
And I think that is so important. Uh, Most of the time, I enjoy writing, but I haven't been writing on justice in a non-fiction way for some time now because it's too frustrating.
Yes.
Our system works too slowly. Uh, Cases are filed by one generation and verdicts are received by the next.
Yes.
Takes years and years and years and years. So Arushi case also took many years. Sanjay Dutt
Yes.
took many years, and justice delayed is justice denied. Witnesses forget what they had seen. Uh, and there are many ways this problem can be solved. There's an infrastructure problem, of course, that many of our court buildings are dilapidated. They don't have proper courtrooms. There's fans are not working. There's no air conditioning. There is also a shortage of judges. So in previous governments, when we were more in the socialist model, what was happening is that there was very poor manpower planning.
Right.
So on the one hand, you had very many people employed in the public sector. Public sector was overstaffed, but the
Yes.
judicial sector was understaffed.
Yes.
So you go into Kanishka or into a five-star hotel which was managed by the government, then you'd find 20 waiters or 20
Yes.
servers just
Yes.
standing there because the whole
Correct.
place has been filled with staff which is not needed. At the same time, you go to the courthouse and you find the judge is just become a date giving machine because he has so many cases that he just keeps adjourning them. Uh, so we need to address this manpower shortage, and it exists at all levels, at the lower courts, at the high courts, at the Supreme Court also. We need, and of course, but we can't just employ judges without having courthouses, and
Yes.
we can't have judges and courthouses without employing experts, whether it's typists, stenographers, administrative assistants, supporting. So there's a lot of money which is needed. But
Yes.
unfortunately, and this is across all political parties, when you reform the justice system, it's a slow process. The benefits will be immense. But it's not like if you build a road or you build a school or you build a hospital, there people say, oh, this government has made the hospital very good, I will vote for them. But to say the government has improved the justice system, that's
Yes.
a slow process. So
Correct.
politicians are reluctant to invest in it. Uh,
True.
but that is something so important. I haven't written on it recently to the extent it should be written on because it disturbs me actually. Uh,
Right.
it just annoys me, and I think, okay, let me write on something which is more pleasurable.
Because you are right, because as you talked about the problem with infrastructure, which is of course very much there, which is similar to a problem highlighted by one of the IPS officers. He said that one of the most often overlooked problem in Delhi is the less number of police force, because 30% of our is into VIP security,
Correct.
20% is in court. What do you
Correct.
expect the common police to do? So this problem is often overlooked. So along with that, one of the problems I believe, which I as a layman, because I'm not at all involved into the legal profession, is that the issue of corruption. Many times we as common man observe, when some cases going on for years, or even the cases like these, the high profile cases, a common man also says कि उन्होंने पैसा खिलाया होगा, whether to any judge or whatever. Everyone is looking after money, and that's why you see justice not being delivered in these high profile cases, so, or being delivered very late, where this Manu Sharma case and lot many Nitish Katara case many. So the issue of corruption, which is sadly a part of our daily life, is somewhere prevalent. It appears in the judiciary as well, and that's why we see such challenges, other than of course due to the infra problems, as you highlighted. So I think that is something again which needs to be
Yes,
examined.
yes,
And
yes. I think the corruption issue is very unfortunate, and actually, it's even more unfortunate when you think of the courts, because so that
yes,
way, judges, court clerks, their salaries must be at the lower court level. You must give them good salaries because
absolutely.
corruption is sometimes need driven, but also greed driven. So at least
Yes,
the need-driven corruption you can eliminate if you make sure that they're good. Because if you look at the justice system you can also say is like a gigantic vacuum cleaner. If it
yes,
works properly, it will vacuum clean corruption in the other areas, whether it's in university, whether it's in industry, whether it's so. Justice system is supposed to be like a vacuum cleaner, but if the vacuum cleaner itself is getting clogged, you know,
exactly, exactly,
then how is it going to clean up corruption in other walks of life?
absolutely. Great. Okay, so two questions before we end the session. One is that you have written on such variety of topics, fiction, non-fiction, plays, practically all aspects required. What advice would you like to give to aspiring writers?
Well, my first advice would be that write on what you know. Because I also, when I began my writing career, uh, I wrote on what I saw in the courts. I was a young lawyer. And in fact, my first book uh, was based just on what I saw in the courts. Fortunately, it was reviewed very favorably by Kushwant Singh, and that uh, helped me a lot. So my first advice would be write in the beginning about things you know, because play to your strength. My second
Great.
piece of advice would be that don't give up your day job, because uh, one of the great editors, Edmund Wilson, his advice to writers was never become a full-time writer, because if you're a full-time writer, you will have very limited experiences. Maybe you go
Right.
to a literary festival. You meet some publisher, you meet some editor, that's all. But if you have
Right.
a regular job, you may have many more interesting life experiences. And also, if you are trying to sustain yourself just by writing, then you will be drawn to compromises. One of
Right.
the reasons why I haven't felt the need to compromise is that I have a secure income from the United Nations. So I want to write on what I want to write on. I can challenge the market because I'm not dependent on the market. But if you
Right.
are somebody who is just, you know, dependent on the market, then uh, you may not be able to write with the kind of freedom that you need. Uh, so,
Certainly.
so my second piece of advice would be don't give up your day job. Uh, Writing there are very few writers who make it so big. In India, it's still a big challenge
Yes.
to earn a proper living from writing. So continue with whatever job, but you have to take out, of course, the time.
Yes.
And you can take out the time. Uh, no job will be so demanding. You
Right.
can take out the time, and you should take out the time. So,
Absolutely.
second piece of advice would be uh, secure your income, have a reasonable income. Don't sacrifice too much for the art that I will become a full time writer. I will
Right.
just, yeah.
And you talked about the next book you're planning to write on spirituality. So I understand it may be perhaps too early to ask, but if you can share any details as much as you're comfortable with. So what
Well, actually,
exactly is it?
no problem. I was thinking actually that uh, there is a lot of, uh, there are two books which I have enjoyed greatly, spiritual books. One is Khalil Gibran's The Prophet,
Okay.
which is full of wisdom. It's also a bestseller. In fact, Khalil Gibran himself could never write a book as great as The Prophet. So
Right.
once he wrote it, because writers are sometimes like muses, he tried to better what he had written, but he couldn't.
Yes.
He spent the rest of his life trying to write something as great as The Prophet, but he couldn't.
True.
And the second book, which I think is also very deeply spiritual, is Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore.
Rabindranath Tagore.
So that is also a deeply spiritual book. And you have a Christian, uh, W.B. Yeats, who won the Nobel
Yes.
Prize, who was friends with Tagore and who wrote a foreword. He writes in the foreword, he said, I have been a Christian all my life, but when I came across these poems, I make sure that I read them when nobody is watching me because I find tears flowing from my eyes. Because this is talking about a rich spirituality which I have no idea. There is a blue God who is being addressed, but whoever has written this, the words on this page, it is just making me, you know, weep. And it is so some deep spiritual. So Christian writing this for Tagore's Gitanjali. So I think these two books have inspired me, and so my because there is a spirituality which is pigeonholed into a particular religion, but
Right.
you don't have to be a Hindu to appreciate Tagore's Gitanjali. You can be a Muslim, you
Absolutely.
can be a Christian, which Yeats was a Christian. He didn't stop being a Christian even after
Yes.
reading Tagore. And the same is true also for Khalil Gibran.
Yes.
Uh, the only people who will not write books like these are the fanatics, which can exist in all religions. Uh,
Absolutely.
so, so I would uh, like to write something which uh, derives from India, but has more universal content.
Yes.
So, what it will be, I'm not so sure right now.
The idea definitely sounds interesting, and I'm definitely looking forward to the book whenever you publish it. And just one last thing which cannot be done here is to get the book signed from you whenever we get a chance to visit, because I am in Delhi. Whenever we get a chance to visit, I would definitely like to get the book signed by you. And
Please
yeah,
come over
looking forward
anytime.
to it.
Yeah, look
Sure,
forward,
sir.
Abhishek. A very thoughtful interview, and
Thank you so much, sir.
I really enjoyed it. And
Same
I
here.
hope to catch up with you with the next soon.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much, and all the
Thank
best
you.
for your upcoming books.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Abhishek. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye bye.
Thanks, Abhishek. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye bye.